Broadcasting to you on WNN 1470 AM and TrentoVision.tv from the world's leading think tank laboratory, buried deep in an undisclosed building in hostile territory where evil and corruption is exposed. You're about to enter the Tom Trento Show.
Trento heads United West, a group that says it defends Western civilization against the onslaught of Islam.
Yeah, and the onslaught of Islam is onslaughting on the 24th of September even more today. Hi, everybody. Tom Trento here. TrentoVision, the United West. If you're watching us, it's theunitedwest.org. Or you may be watching at TrentoVision.tv. Hello, good to see all of you. If you're listening on our 50,000 watt flagship station out of the neat little town of Boca Raton, Florida, WNN, you can literally go to your smartphones or computers and type in wwnnradio.com. When you get to the website, that's the radio station's website, you can hit on live, listen live, or you can go directly to TrentoVision.tv or theunitedwest.org. We give you so many ways to watch, or teapartycommunity.com with all our friends over there. The simplest way on your little smartphone, mine is pink, on your little smartphone, you can download iHeartRadio. You should be doing this. The world is changing. You can control the world digitally with these things in your hand. And don't say, oh, I don't know how to do that stuff. Dummies, believe me, dummies can download an application. And somehow I get Democrat when I think dummies, but I shouldn't do that. No. I shouldn't do that.
You shouldn't do that.
You should, because judging from Washington, D.C., there's a few dummies in the Republican Party right now, let me tell you.
Yes.
And there's many of them at the UN right now, Mark. We were there a year ago today.
Yeah, same area.
Remember we were at the UN and we were screwing with Ahmadinejad's bodyguards?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was hanging out there. Oh, we're not Iranian Secret Service. No, we're cabbies in New York.
We're cabbies. They all have the same jacket he wears, the same shirt. They're
We're
all
taxi
standing
drivers.
there. We're sticking cameras in their faces, and they're going, no camera, no camera. Well, this is America, buddy.
Right.
You know, not your gulags in Iran. But in any event, it's, don't look to the United Nations for intelligent people, particularly this commander-in-chief who said, yeah, I'm really trying to figure out a way to diplomatically work with Iran and avoid, them building a nuclear weapon. This bespeaks, and maybe our guest today will want to comment on this. We have a special guest for you, part 3 of our ongoing expose of CAIR. Yesterday I started the show talking about CAIR, Council on American Islamic Relations, and I think I started something like this. It sucks to be CAIR today, let me tell you. And we had David Yerushalmi.
Shalmi.
The Italian pronunciation.
Yeah, right.
Who did a brilliant, detailed exposition of the literal money laundering syndicate that is functioning within the CAIR superstructure. And I think our guest will want us to speak about that.
You know what? And just a quick note on that. We were talking about this after the show, me and Damon, and how much of a poor money laundering organization. He needs to take some hints. CAIR needs to take some hints from your mafioso counterparts in
or
up in New
just
Jersey.
watch Breaking Bad.
Yeah, really.
I have never.
I mean,
seen
it's such a poor money laundering. Oh, we're gonna give it to another organization called CAIR, and give it back to us called CAIR. Come on.
They at least could have called it RYAC.
And we're going to take the money from Saudi Arabia and put it over. Unbelievable.
I know.
Did you catch the RYAC? That's CAIR backwards, kind of like Sama.
Oh, no. But no, I didn't. That's pretty interesting. In any event, welcome everybody to TrentoVision. We're on every day, 5 to 6. East Coast time. Thank you, all our friends on the left coast out there, good people, all our friends out east. In fact, we will be visiting, Mark and I will be visiting many of you in Israel next week. We're going to be there for a while. And Lord willing and the creek don't rise, we're going to be reporting back live every day from Israel. We'll be with Frank Gaffney and a few others on a national security fact-finding mission. We're going up to Lebanon, to the border, over to the Golan Heights, to the border in Syria. We're going to go down to Gaza again, like we did with our special guest last year. We're going to go down to Eilat, to the southern border with Jordan and Egypt. And we're going to bring you from the front lines exactly what's going on, because as we all know, this place, the Dome of the Rock, this place is right in the center of the geopolitical and possible apocalyptic concerns of the world. But today, our subject is, I want to touch very quickly on the president and his comments on diplomatically dealing with the new president of Iran. We have an Iranian expert on. In fact, our guest is a fellow with the Clarion Project, good friends of ours who make wonderful documentaries. They made the documentary Iranium, and our guest has been in that. Our guest has been in Third Jihad, Obsession. Our guest is like Superwoman, you know?
She is.
She can do all
Wonder
these
Woman.
different
I call her
things.
Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman, okay,
Yeah,
Wonder Woman. She's a fellow with Center for Security
Well,
Policy.
let's ask her. Let's ask her if she wants to be Superwoman or Wonder Woman.
Yeah,
Which
what do
one
you
she-
prefer, secret guest? Where are you? There you are.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Our floating head. We
Yeah,
should call-
floating head. Our mystery guest, there she is, Clare Lopez. Let's give her a hand, ladies and
Yay,
gentlemen.
Claire. Woo!
Claire spent 20 years with the agency that works out of Langley, and retired, but never stopped fighting the bad guys. And she found herself last week as a floating head
Floating head.
in the 162-page.
Let me see if I can find a floating head, Claire.
Okay, see if you can find that. The 162-page hit piece by the Council on American-Islamic Relations, which is Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, and a criminal syndicate right now. They did a lot of research on Claire and the organization she works with, and they had this kind of wheel of desperados from their point of view, and Claire's head popped up all over the place. What is with you, Claire? Why are you driving CAIR so crazy?
You know, I can only hope that I am. But I think they are just at their wits' end. It took 162 pages to document all of us, people, individuals, groups, think tanks, including, of course, the United West, featured prominently, as well as the Center for Security Policy, in the counter-jihad movement. And I think that we're scoring a few too many points for them, maybe, on how it is Islamic doctrine, law, and scripture that is cited every single 100% of the time when jihadis like those over in Nairobi at the shopping mall go on a killing rampage. They never cite the New or the Old Testament or the Rig Veda or the Norse legends. None of that. It's always they cite to Islam, to Islamic doctrine, law, and scripture.
They don't even cite Scientology. You know, I mean, that's not even involved in the global jihad in the world with our space aliens and everything else. That's a critically important point you just made, Claire. And for our viewers and listeners today, we have a fascinating show. Claire, myself, and the boys here will be digging into to CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations. And David made a point yesterday to say that our analysis of this so-called Muslim civil rights group is critically important, because what they are doing and the kind of influence they are peddling in key institutional positions in the United States, starting with the administration, affects each and every American where they live, even in the middle of the heartland, in the middle of the country. So this is relevant information, and our big idea, each show, Claire, we try to have a big idea. The big idea today is to beat CAIR while they are down. I was a amateur boxer for a while, and you learn when your opponent is wobbling, you don't get a glass of water for him. You move in and finish him off if you can. Claire, I'm going to say Claire and CAIR. CAIR is wobbling right now. The ideological structure upon which they've built their organization and the economic structure is fragmenting before our very eyes. So we're going to pound CAIR today. But really, we're going to start with the very serious situation happening in Nairobi, Kenya, African country, African interesting city. And we're going to make the connection between the jihad going on right now as we speak, folks, in this beautiful Westgate Mall, which would be comparable to any American mall, and the fact that, well, it's going on right now. We're going to make the connection between what seems to be over there, what is going on right here, and even a direct connection with the organization CAIR and their obstruction to dealing with some of the bad guys that are actually fighting over there. You ready for all this, Claire?
Let's go.
All right, let's make it happen. Nairobi, give the folks a sense of Kenya, a little bit about the country Kenya, the city Nairobi, and this particular mall, and then we'll look at the attack that started this past Saturday.
Well, sure. Well, Kenya is in Eastern Africa. It sits along the eastern coastline of Africa. It borders on Somalia, important for this discussion. And it formerly was a British colony, but gained its independence in the 1960s and has really developed economically and in every other way since then. This mall called Westgate in downtown Nairobi, just like you said, Tom, it is a gleaming, modern, upscale mall, which would be frequented by the business people, by visitors from other countries, and upper class Kenyans. A little bit pricey, I'm sure, for the majority of Kenyans, but in terms of a beautiful mall in the center of downtown Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, this was a showpiece. This was a beautiful, beautiful mall, and it was full of shoppers this past Saturday, 4 days ago, when this attack unfolded.
And Nairobi, well, Kenya, I know it's a country in transition into from a third world to a second world, first world, but it's an oil-rich country, isn't it?
No, it really doesn't have much in the way of oil. I think probably its biggest income earner probably is tourism. Kenya is absolutely full of the most gorgeous game parks that you would ever want to see. I myself spent a fair amount of time in Kenya back in the day and visited all these game parks. I mean, every animal you know that you would want to see, the big game, the cheetahs, the lions, the elephants, the giraffes, the migration of the wildebeest. I mean, flamingos down along the coastline. On Lake Nakuru, I should say. Absolutely, just stunningly beautiful. And that is what attracts many visitors to Kenya. But also, it has developed a really modern downtown in Nairobi with conference centers, hotels, and other accommodations for the business person and out of country guests.
So if one of our viewers or listeners, many I would assume, has this concept of Kenya, African country, with Aborigines running around with spears and rings in their nose and their ears and all of that, that really isn't what's going on in Nairobi, Kenya, correct?
Well, think again, because
Yeah.
Kenya is many things, and it is a tribally based society. That is certainly true, and those tribes do still exist, but no, they're not basically running around with spears and rings through their noses. Many of them have joined the modern economy, and they're educated. The British, as colonial powers, left behind quite a good administrative system in terms of governance and also in terms of the school system. So Kenya is moving ahead. Yes.
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation about the nasty colonial imperialists. When you really look at the legacy of Britain They brought education, literacy, medicine, cleanliness, all of this to many of these third world countries. And people neglect to see some of the benefits of a country that was working with another country. That's another show. But the issue today is the position of Kenya being a Western country. Would you call it a Western country with a legitimate democracy and a free system of voting for elections?
Well, it's an African country, and I think they would be very proud to call themselves an African country. But certainly they have adopted, the Western system of parliamentary democracy. They have a parliament. They elect the legislators. They elect their president. They have parties and election campaigns. And generally their elections are considered, for the most part, free and fair elections.
All right, and they're friendly to Western powers. They're still friendly with Britain and the United States?
Mm-hmm. Certainly.
Okay. All right,
Yeah.
so we have this friendly country there, and bordering on that rat hole of a failed state, Somalia. Quickly, I think the geography and the geopolitics are important for our viewers and listeners to understand why a mall is under attack and why that could also occur in the United States. Give us a little quick overview on Somalia and what the complaint is between Somalia and Kenya.
Yeah, well, Somalia is not quite such a successful country as Kenya is. It sits exactly on that jutting part of Eastern Africa that is called the Horn of Africa. It is in two parts now. The northern part is called Somaliland, and for all intents and purposes exists separately from the southern part. The difference here is who were the colonial powers. In the north, it was the British. In the southern part of Somalia, it was the Italians. And it is in that southern part that the capital of Mogadishu is located. And Somalia, like Kenya, is a tribal society, but it never ever modernized or advanced in the way that Kenya has. It was governed in Somalia by a dictator, Siad Barre, until about 1991, if I remember right, when he was overthrown. And since that time, Somalia really has been without good governance, racked by chaos and war. Of course, we've got the United States involvement in helping with humanitarian efforts in the 90s. You'll all remember, 1993 and Black Hawk Down. Well, that was the United States trying to deliver humanitarian food aid to starving Somalis. But because the warlords were vying for power, they saw outsiders and Westerners in particular as enemies, non-Muslims, of course. I should add, Somalia is nearly a 100% Muslim country. Primarily, they are Sunni. Lots of them are Sufi. Not that means they're non-violent, but it is a particular take on Islam. And so the history basically since the 1990s has just been one of chaos and continuous warfare for this country. They never really got a government together that really is able to impose rule of law. And this may be a good entree into what we're seeing in Somalia today, which was the rise of al-Shabab.
All right, yeah. So what we have, folks, at 19 minutes after 5 o'clock in the afternoon on September 24th, WNN 1470, Tom Trento here with our special guest, Clare Lopez. Clare is a fellow with Center for Security Policy, think tank, great think tank out of Washington, D.C. Clare was with the United West last year when we went to Israel on that fact-finding mission. This year, Frank Gaffney, the head of Center for Security Policy, is going on the tour. I'll be with him. We're the two speakers. And Claire's also a fellow with the Clarion Project. And Claire does a lot of work with
she is
our
also
group.
and she is also the floating head of CAIR, because we do have that image.
We have,
now,
by the magic
CAIR.
of television,
Oh,
let's see
no.
her floating head.
The floating
There,
head of Claire.
let's zoom in on her.
Yeah, the floating head of Claire. Look, we're going to zoom right.
Oh,
in on
you're
her.
right in the
You're
middle
right in
there,
the middle
Claire.
of
Oh,
CAIR.
she is the center of all this Islamophobia, it
Right,
appears.
look at that. And she's all
You
the way
are
down
the
here.
culprit woman.
She is the
How
cover.
many
look at
times
board,
that
your
your
board
head-
member and your board of a member
Oh,
of
my
advisors.
word,
Look
Claire.
at that. Look, you were just all, and you're like on the top 3 list of Claire's hate list. Of CAIR's hate list.
You can't see.
There is.
You didn't see the graphic, but we have on the screen right now. When you watch the replay, you'll see it. Your floating head in a yellow space capsule appears in different places, different organizations.
Yes, quite.
Shame
the
on you for driving
she
the
is
boys.
the queen bee
are.
of the Islamic phobic network.
Yes,
Yes,
you
she
are.
is.
Let's
Most
not
hated
take
woman.
it too far here.
You are very most hated woman.
Yes, but we have this country, Somalia, and everyone remembers Mogadishu, Black Hawk Down, 1993. I think it was General Adid. I think it was his name. We remember that Islamic country. Now, what is the religious makeup of Kenya?
Kenya is mixed. There are many African animist religions, beliefs still there in the tribal areas. There are many Christians, and there are Muslims as well, especially closer to the coastline, which is the eastern part of Kenya.
So it's an east-west thing versus like a north-south thing, like in Nigeria? Or,
Not exactly. No, it's more that the influence of Islam came to Kenya through its coastline.
Oh, okay.
And so that is to this day still where the strongest influence remains. Unfortunately, a lot of the history of the Islamic influence in Kenya, as well as other parts of Africa, had to do with the Islamic slave trade, the Arab Islamic slave trade. And in decades, centuries past, Kenya figured prominently in that slave trade, where the Muslim Arabs would come to raid countries. It wasn't a country then, but areas like Kenya now, called Kenya now. Raid those parts of Africa for slaves, which then were entered into the global slave trade.
All right, now it's been 2 years since Kenya has had an army in Somalia, and they've been out of there for a couple of years. There really hasn't been a directed military movement of any point. Question number one. What is the tension between Somalia and Kenya? And folks, if you're looking at the United States, we're down here in Florida. It would be like Florida, having tension with Georgia, and an ongoing battle. What was the nature of the tension between Somalia and Kenya? Then we'll move into the al-Shabab portion.
Right. Well, the al-Shabab story is sort of central to that. So let me start there, because what happened back, as I said, after the fall of the strongman Siad Barre, who had ruled the place for decades, it fell into chaos in a lot of ways, kind of similar to what happened in Afghanistan after the defeat of the Red Army Soviets in the 1980s. And then the warlord period just devastated the country even further in Afghanistan. And then what rose up in the 90s was the Taliban, which was an effort to bring law and order to Afghanistan, defeat the warlords, but that law, of course, was Islamic law. Well, much the same thing happened in Somalia after the fall of Siad Barre, and many of these tribes and warlords just fought back and forth. And of course, the Black Hawk Down incident and the effort to bring, humanitarian aid into Somalia was all part of that chaos. Well, out of that chaos, a group of Islamic courts rose up in the middle 2000s. Back in the 1990s it rose up. That 2000s is al-Shabab. It was called the Islamic Courts Union, and it was a union, a coordination among a bunch of Islamic courts. These are courts that dispense Sharia, Islamic law. And the idea was that this was a way to bring some kind of order out of the chaos that Somalia had become. And then from Islamic Courts Union, in the 2000s, then about 2006, rose its youth wing which was called al-Shabab. And al-Shabab in Arabic means the youth. By the way, Somalia is not Arabic per se. It is a distinct African country with its own language, Somali. It is not Arabic, although many people there do speak Arabic, but they are distinct. They traditionally have been herders with herds of goats and sheep and camels and so forth that they typically traded across the Gulf of Aden over the centuries with Yemen. Okay. And so that connection remains. That geographic connection is kind of important. It remains to this day. But so that is how this Islamic terror organization affiliated with AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, headquartered in Yemen, how they rose up and began to pose a threat to their neighbors, including Kenya.
And all right, you have Somalia. It's a totally dysfunctional state. It resorts back to tribal behavior, and the tribes are fighting each other. They finally come up with these Sharia courts. 26 minutes after 5 o'clock, folks. We have Clare Lopez with us. We're drilling down, explaining the geopolitical and geographic structure of the relationship of Somalia to Kenya, so you have a better, full understanding of the battle that's taking place as we speak on this 24th of September at the Westgate Mall in the main city of Nairobi. So the Sharia courts are developing, and I'm sure they're enforcing the Sharia courts with Sharia punitive measures, the jurisprudential system.
Cutting off hands,
Cutting
stoning
off hands and all that
stoning
stuff.
women.
Stoning women,
yes.
all the typical Sharia
For the
stuff.
crime of being raped.
Right.
Now, did the Kenyans go into Somalia saying, hey, who crossed the border first and why?
Well, it seems that it was the al-Shabab militias that crossed the border, not just into Kenya, but also into Ethiopia,
And
which borders it as well.
Which side
And
is al-Shabaab again?
pardon, say that?
Which
again?
side is the al-Shabaab? Is that the Somali side or the Kenyan side? The
Al-Shabaab is Somali.
Okay.
Yeah, they're the
And
crazy guys.
it moved across the border from the east towards the west and the north,
Okay.
which is where Ethiopia and
map.
Kenya lie respective to Somalia. And there are irredentist or separatist tendencies in both of those places, which al-Shabaab attempted to take advantage of. One other country of note in the Horn of Africa we've got to bring into this is Eritrea, which you might recall broke away from Ethiopia in an extremely lengthy, terribly bloody, costly in human terms war over a period of decades. And Eritrea is a supporter of al-Shabaab.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, but back to Ethiopia and Kenya, the cross-border raids, very typical, of course, of Islamic jihad. You know, as Samuel Huntington said, the Islam has bloody borders and bloody innards too. Yeah. Well, this is the bloody borders part. And even though borders are fairly not precisely defined in some of these areas, it's very arid, desert kind of country in these parts. But in any case, Kenya and Ethiopia both felt that al-Shabaab was a national security threat to both of their countries, their sovereignty, their borders. And beginning in 2011, and also, by the way, together with the African Union, which joined in this effort, pushed back against al-Shabaab, pushed them back into Somalia, entered into Somalia even, and took reprisals against al-Shabaab to deter them from coming across those borders again.
I know it's important that 29 minutes after 5 o'clock on the 24th of September for our listeners and our viewers to understand al-Shabab, which means in Arabic, though Somalia is not an Arabic nation, it's an African nation. Al-Shabaab means the youth, just like the Taliban, you know, the student. And al-Shabaab, if you're a member of al-Shabaab, which is a terrorist organization, they view themselves as Islamic freedom fighters, obviously.
Freedom fighters.
But they have pledged allegiance to al-Qaeda, to Osama bin Laden, to al-Qaeda, they are Al-Qaeda.
Absolutely.
It's fair to say al-Shabab is Al-Qaeda, correct?
Certainly, absolutely. In 2012, the leadership of al-Shabab explicitly pledged bayat, allegiance to Al-Qaeda, to Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader of Al-Qaeda. And the other thing then to note is that even from before that period of time, there were strong links between, again, AQAP, headquartered in Yemen, and al-Shabab in Somalia. The other linkages that I might mention right here, it might be a good place to do it, is that al-Shabab, according to counterterrorism experts, also on the continent of Africa, is linked to AQIM, that's Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb up in the northern part of Africa, all right, and also with Boko Haram, the Islamic jihadist movement in Nigeria, the entire other side of the continent in West Africa. There are links of sharing of training and techniques and explosive training and that sort of thing among these three on the continent of Africa, in addition to the ties across the Gulf of Aden into Yemen with AQAP.
Yeah, but Claire, everything you're saying belies the fact that the commander-in-chief said Al-Qaeda is decimated. Al-Qaeda is on the run. So what's going on here?
Well, they may be running, but they're running into shopping malls. They're running into American diplomatic missions in Benghazi. They're running into Christian churches in Nairobi, in Nigeria, and slaughtering people by the hundreds in Nigeria. They're running all right. They're not running away from us.
Claire, if you and I wanted to start build an army, like somebody said, let's have an army of al-Shabab, an army of the youth, somebody's got to write a check. You need money to buy guns and weapons and food and all the explosives and all of that. Where is uniquely al-Shabab, this sort of contained group coming out of Somalia and Minneapolis? Where are they getting their funding from?
Well, we certainly do know from experts that their weapons come from diverse places, including Yemen and AQAP, including Iran, and including the country of Eritrea.
Okay. So they're getting it from there. All right, let's move into the attack, the reason for the attack by al-Shabab and the implications of this attack and the connection to Minneapolis and the connection to CAIR. What was the reason that al-Shabab said, let's go kill, let's have a little test. Let's go to the mall, this fancy-dancy mall, which is all the elite come, and I've read some reports that Jews own stores there, and one of the sheikhs, one of the leaders of al-Shabab said, Jews are there, we have to attack them. Almost like, as we say often, it's in the DNA of the jihadis to want to kill the Jews. What was their reason after 2 years of relatively quiet between Kenya and Somalia? Why did they attack last Saturday?
Well, I think we have to keep in mind that there have been prior plots for attacks like these that were stopped by the Kenyans, by others, before they could be carried out like this. But the intent of al-Shabab to get revenge for the Ethiopians and the Kenyans in particular, pushback against their own cross-border raids back in 2011 remained. And so explicitly and specifically, this was about getting back at Kenya. Now, the other thing I might mention is the similarity, almost to a blueprint, of this kind of attack, a swarming attack, very well planned, very well executed, high discipline among the attackers, to the attacks in Mumbai, India, 2008. It's about 5 years ago. Although, of course, the Mumbai attacks were much more extensive, including something like a dozen different locations at once. But the tactics used were very similar. In what sense? To attack places that were soft targets, they didn't attack a police station. They didn't attack a ministry building, Ministry of Defense or something. They attacked a shopping mall. It was a soft target. And then, just as you mentioned, Tom, going after the Jews, they did this in Mumbai as well. It is in the DNA, unfortunately, of Islamic doctrine and Islamic jihadis, not all Muslims,
Right.
but Islamic doctrine and Islamic jihadis are commanded by Islamic doctrine to fight and slay the infidel, even if they be people of the book, meaning Christians and Jews. That is straight out of the Quran, verse 929. So the similarities, again, they're going after a soft target. They're going after a place where Jews have establishments, shops, and restaurants and so forth. And they are gaining revenge for the Kenyan military strike against al-Shabab.
36 minutes after 5 o'clock on the 24th, Clare Lopez is our guest. Claire's retired from the Central Intelligence Agency some years back, and then went to work as an intelligence analyst, trainer, educator, writer, communicator, speaker on all of these issues, and is a fabulous resource and a true American treasure. It must have been, we can only imagine, it's ongoing now, something like close to 72 hours. In the early hours, as the al-Shabab members were walking through crowds of people, asking them, had a quiz. What is, how do you do the rakah? Do the prayer for us. Let me see you do the prayer. And if you're not a Muslim, you don't know the exact positions. You put your hands and you bow and all of that. Or one of the questions they were asking was, what is Muhammad's mother's name? And if you got that wrong, you got a bullet between your eyes. And the reports we're getting now is so many people hearing this went into hiding and were trying to memorize some of this information if they were given this pop quiz by al-Shabab.
What is Muhammad's mother's name?
And by the way, for
who the hell
future
cares?
reference, it's Amina bin Wahab.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would have said, yeah, here's our name right here, and they would have killed us, obviously. I think they would have figured out we aren't Muslims. But
could you imagine if they had the Ayatollah of Islamophobia?
Yeah, I know. That would have been good. But Claire, let's talk for a second from a national security perspective and the tactical versus strategic value of this type of Mumbai's soft target approach on a mall, because New York went on high alert and other parts of the United States. I'm sure the Mall of the Americas did in Minneapolis. From a tactical point of view, they go in, they bust up the place, they kill 100 people. Tactically, I see no tactical value. What strategic value, long-term objective strategic value, does al-Shabaab, al-Qaeda see in hitting soft targets like malls?
Well, I think we have to look at what the purpose is. The ultimate purpose, of course, for al-Shabaab and prior to it, the Islamic Courts Union in Somalia, was the establishment of Islamic governance under Islamic law in Somalia. More broadly speaking, and for al-Qaeda all over the world, it is the same objective, the establishment of Islamic governments under Sharia law. Now, it's a good thing that you brought this up, Tom, to bring this back to the United States, the Western Hemisphere, Canada and the United States, I should add, because the expat, exile, refugee, immigrant communities of Somalis that are in Canada and the United States now number somewhere in the vicinity of 150,000 people. They're clustered in certain cities like Minneapolis, like Tucson and Phoenix, Arizona, Shelbyville, Tennessee, places in Kansas City and elsewhere. And it is in those communities that al-Qaeda, al-Shabaab, has been recruiting young men through the mosque system, through the imams at the mosques, to join jihad, to join al-Shabaab.
Here in America.
In America, yeah.
Yeah, in the United States and in Canada, both. We have this from law enforcement and court cases that have already become public record. Unfortunately, a lot of these young Somali men that are being targeted in these communities are born in America or born in Canada. They have Canadian or American passports. They can travel back and forth freely on those passports. And if nobody happens to notice that they've been out, perhaps over to Somalia, received training in weapons and tactics and fighting, explosives, and they lived, and they didn't blow themselves up in suicide bombings, as several already have, but then they make their way back to the United States with all these newfound, new honed skills, plus imbued with this ideology of Islamic jihad. Which shopping mall is it going to be next? And again, the terror is, as S.K. Malik, Brigadier General S.K. Malik, wrote a small book called The Quranic Concept of War back in the late 1970s, translated into English a few years later. And in that book, he describes the Pakistani military doctrine, essentially, which is the Quranic concept of war. And in there he says, terror, and I'm paraphrasing this a little bit, but terror is not just the end. It is not just the means to an end. It is the end result desired. That when terror has been struck into the hearts of the enemy, there is little left to be achieved. In other words, once you have struck terror into the hearts of the enemy, as Quranic verses 8:12, 8:60, and other verses from the Quran command, that population so terrified is in your hands. And they will do whatever they can do to avoid being hit by terror again.
Peace, yeah.
They will do whatever they can to accommodate Islam, to capitulate to Islam, to accept encroachment of Sharia in the culture, and eventually the objective, of course, to impose it in the law. And so that's the purpose of terror. It's not just to pile up pyramids of skulls like Genghis Khan or something. It is to strike terror into the heart of the enemy so that that enemy becomes malleable, becomes amenable to the imposition of Sharia, first in culture and then in law.
This is an extremely important point, folks.
No, very important. Very important.
43 minutes past 5 o'clock on WNN 1470. You're with Tom Trento, Mark Damon, and our special guest, Clare Lopez. We're discussing Nairobi right now, and the al-Shabab, al-Qaeda affiliate. Al-Shabab is an affiliate, a blood brother, if you will, of al-Qaeda. And my question was, from a military perspective, the tactical versus strategic value of an attack where you're hitting citizens, and purely from a military point of view, there's in a Western construct, there's no real tactical value in going into a mall and killing a bunch of people, and then you get on. You're not going to gain territory. You're not going to gain money. You're not going to gain weapons. You're not going to gain anything. But from the Quranic perspective, as Claire is explaining, not only is a soft target. Now we're saying this, folks. 2 years ago, we're yelling, the Muslim Brotherhood is coming. The Muslim Brotherhood is coming. People thought we were nuts. The Muslim Brotherhood is here. People are going, oh my word, you guys were right. We're telling you right now, what you're seeing in Europe, what you're seeing in India, what you're seeing in Africa, is simply the petri dish, the testing ground for what's going to be in the Western Hemisphere here, North America, and Quranic doctrine. And if you listen to Claire or myself or our colleagues on Team B2, we don't hate Muslims, notwithstanding the goofy publication that Claire put out. We are fighting an ideology. We critique, analyze, deconstruct an ideology. This ideology happens to be Islam. Within Islam, there's a jihadist component that is prevailing today. And that jihadist component says that terror in and of itself, even though used tactically, has a phenomenal strategic value. And this makes a lot of sense, particularly in open cultures, tribal cultures that did not have a centralized federal government with a standing army. that to strike terror in the fears of the tribe, the oppositional tribe, the tribe's going to say, we can't beat them. We'll appease and do what they want. So this doctrine, this military doctrine of Quranic warfare from the 7th century is being implemented in the 21st century, ought not have strategic value. But because the West has become so morally bankrupt, weak, and lost its will to fight, what ought to be an anomaly is becoming a major, significant military, asymmetric military doctrine. This is frightening because if a couple of malls get hit right here in America in the same way, I could see folks in Congress saying, we've got to cut all aid to Israel. Israel's the cause of the problem. We've got to get out of the Middle East. That's all they want. If we get out of the Middle East, they'll be happy with us and they'll love us. Let Iran have the friggin' bomb and, Muslims will stop blowing up our malls. We see that coming, folks. If the West does not have the will to fight, the West will lose. It's that simple.
Hey,
I ran across an article that Claire wrote almost 2 years ago, earlier today, doing a little research. And the title was African Jihadists' Grand Ambitions.
Put it up there. Do you remember that article, Claire?
Yeah, sure do.
You were prophetic,
Right.
in the fact of looking at some of these African nations that are Islamic, that are going to extend their jihad in various asymmetrical ways.
And I was doing a quick read through in the article. She said something even more kind of it's not interesting. It's what this narrative that you hear all the time. She says, mistaking Boko Haram's jihad for a mere disgruntlement over poverty or wealth disparity plays into the hands, enabling the sophisticated Islamic terror organizations with possible ties to al-Qaeda to claim its war conquest against non-Muslim Nigerians is nothing more than a righteous effort to end corruption.
What does that mean, Claire? What did you mean by that?
Well, basically what I meant is, for instance, to this day, the United States Department of State refuses to list Boko Haram on its foreign terrorist organizations list.
Are you
I
kidding
bet
me?
most people don't realize that. Al-Shabab is on the list, Al-Qaeda's on the list, AQIM's on the list. Boko Haram is not. And what is happening in Nigeria and has been happening, really, you have to look at this as it's playing out over the span of centuries. Because Islam first came to North and to West Africa way back, 7th, 8th, 9th centuries. And it wasn't always an even advance. It wasn't a steady advance. It came in fits and starts. Half of Nigeria came under Islamic rule by the 20th century. Literally, Islamic law prevails in the northern half of about 18 or so of Nigeria. I think they have about 36 states. And they're now pushing forward south, expanding that. And religiously cleansing the northern half of Nigeria that they already control. It's a horrible term, ethnic cleansing, but what it means is they are slaughtering Christians by the hundreds, trying to make northern Nigeria a no-go zone only for Muslims. Muslim law, Islamic law, no Christians. And they're pushing south to take as much control over the south as they can too. The refusal to see that this is Islamic jihad. Yes, there are subordinate conflicts over land, over herding rights and grazing rights and other things. Absolutely legitimate. Wealth disparity in Nigeria is horrific. Oil wealth, great oil wealth, not shared equally among its people. All true, all absolutely so. But the bigger picture about this is Islamic jihad's inexorable movement to conquer more and more and more territory and put it under Islamic law.
Well, speaking of that, how about the CAIR association with the Somali terrorist groups?
Well, hang on to that for one
that?
second. Let me clean one point up for our listeners and viewers. In 1993, folks, and you're getting a history lesson today that explains the context to the global jihad movement, but more specifically this jihad action in Nairobi and the connection to the United States. But how did the Somalis get here? We kind of alluded to it earlier. 1993, when that country was falling apart, Black Hawk Down, the Somalis wanted to get out of there. They wanted to leave Mogadishu and the other cities in Somalia. So our State Department, along with many religious Catholic organizations and Protestant organizations, started to relocate political refugees to the United States. And I don't know who comes up with this stuff.
It was the Clintons.
Well, the Clintons were, but who says, let's take them out of the desert in Africa and put them in South Dakota.
And
right?
Tennessee.
And Tennessee. And I read a little bit, I did a little studying about some of the, all this is Ivy League world reconstruction.
Well, they're impoverished, Tom. They're impoverished. That's the reason they're violent and they're upset and they're getting beat up. They just had money.
But let's take them out of this climate and put them in a different climate so they become acclimatized and they see what America is about and all of this. No filtering of their view, their ideology. In a nice section of it used to be a nice section of San Diego, Claire, there are 35,000 Somalis. The area is called Little Mogadishu. And our friends that you know, our California counter-jihad friends, they said, you can't drive in there. You can't drive through that town. It's the worst of the worst of the worst. This is in San Diego. So we have this influx of Somalis 20 years ago. And the seeds that were planted then, the fruit now is developing. And with the worldwide global jihad, the recruiting in some of these Sunni mosques are recruiting the youth. And by the way, Boko Haram, I thought that was interesting. Haram is haram, not lawful. Boko is knowledge, Western knowledge.
Yes.
So
Unlawful
Western knowledge is not acceptable to us.
Unlawful
You must remain stupid.
This is the civilizational divide between Islam and the West. So we get all these Somalis from 1993 and on. Right now, let's jump to what is taking place in Minneapolis, because there's a Muslim imam up there that has been castigated and vilified by CAIR, Council on American Islamic Relations. What do you know about that little situation?
Well, here's the connection. Judicial Watch just came out with a piece today talking about how the organization CAIR, Council on American Islamic Relations, tried to impede the Somali community's cooperation with the FBI as the FBI began to look at this recruitment process out of the mosques in the Somali communities like Minneapolis and elsewhere. CAIR was in those communities actively telling them don't cooperate with the FBI, even though the communities themselves, we should say, wanted to cooperate with the FBI. They don't want their sons going off to jihad to blow themselves up and kill people in Somalia. And they wanted to cooperate. But CAIR was in there impeding that connection. And telling them not to talk to the FBI. And 2 years ago, in the summer of 2011, Representative Peter King of New York held hearings in the House of Representatives, you might remember. And one of those in July of that year was specifically dedicated to the radicalization out of the Somali immigrant communities in the United States.
Right.
And he had among his witnesses at least one individual from the Somali community in Minneapolis. His name was Abdurisak Bilsi. And Mr. Bilsi talked about how the parents and the community, the Somali community in Minneapolis, wanted to help the FBI to stop this recruitment and radicalization of their sons. And CAIR was in there telling them, don't talk to the FBI. So that's the Judicial Watch report from today. But here's the connection again. The Muslim Brotherhood, and of course CAIR is the Muslim Brotherhood, is Hamas, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, CAIR in the United States, Hamas in Gaza. And they are acting as the vanguard for Al-Qaeda and the rest of the Islamic jihad movement. They are acting as the indoctrination shock troops, the influence operation shock troops, to prepare our society to accept Islamic law, Sharia, again, first in the culture, by altering work hours, by making gyms female only, by allowing taxi drivers, for instance, at the Minneapolis airport, not to accept passengers who were carrying alcohol or may have been with a seeing eye dog. These kinds of things in the culture first, then the law coming after that to follow. That is CAIR's role. CAIR is Muslim Brotherhood. It is acting as shock troops, advance vanguard, to prepare American society for Sharia to come.
All right, Claire, I want you to comment on one more item. We only have a couple of minutes left. We're gonna have to do another part with you because there's so much with CAIR now as we're putting this connection together. But
Does she
one
have
great
time to
movie,
tape another show?
yeah, one great movie that everybody needs to get. You can contact us, Tom at TrentoVision.tv. Losing Our Sons really is a graphic illustration of this this movement by Al Qaeda to recruit young kids in America to join, and we'll get you a copy for free if you contact us. But Claire, you put an interesting article together recently where you commented on the Inspector General of the United States of America reprimanding the FBI for associating, liaisoning with CAIR. We got about a minute left. We will have you back to go deeply into that and the Minneapolis situation with CAIR, but sketch out the article that you wrote, please.
Yeah, really quickly. Again, this was for the Clarion Project, clarionproject.org. And it was about the policy of the Department of Justice and the FBI arrived at in 2008 in the wake of the Holy Land Foundation Hamas terror funding trial. That decision, that policy to severely restrict what had been close contacts, relationship between the FBI and CAIR in an outreach program previously. However, the Department of Justice in its recent, just this past week, report slams the FBI for failing to keep and to implement its own policy. In other words, that the contacts between FBI and officers, agents in their field stations with CAIR continued even after the policy said no. And in certain cases like Los Angeles, especially egregious, special agent in charge there, according to the DOJ report, Inspector General's report, said that special agent in charge, FBI agent Los Angeles, instructed his own subordinates, do not obey this policy. I'll set the policy for Los Angeles field station. This is a problem. And rightly so, the Department of Justice Inspector General has slammed the FBI for this. CAIR's in a lot of hot water this week. You know, from its ridiculous whining hit list of all of the counter-jihad movement to the DOJ report, and now, of course, seeing how CAIR, according to the Judicial Watch report, impeded Somali communities' efforts to work with the FBI to stop their sons from being recruited to jihad.
All right, well, let's just review with about 1 minute left for our listening and viewing audience. CAIR comes out last week with a goofy hit piece, as you said, and maybe it was preemptive because they knew all hell was going to crash in on them. And it got no traction. It was really a big ho-hum deal. They ran a few 990s. They tried to make it look like there's this tremendous financing. Then it comes out that they're running a money laundering syndicate, CAIR is. They interfered with good Muslims in Minneapolis trying to stop kids from being recruited by Al Qaeda. The Inspector General reprimands the FBI, certain officers, for associating, liaisoning with CAIR. I mean, Claire, we got to go. But as I started the show yesterday, I'll end the show today. It sucks to be CAIR right now.
Part two.
It's great to be Claire. It sucks to be CAIR right now. Okay? You take care. Thank you. You are indeed an American treasure. We will see you. Have you back on in the near future to
Thank
go
you.
to part
Thank you,
two.
Tom and Mark and Damon and the gang.
Bye,
All right,
floating
bye-bye
head.
now. Take it easy. That's all, folks.